America's workforce. Its strength is our nation's success. Join Ronnie Spellman on I Build America podcast as we explore innovative solutions and inspiring stories from leaders and workers shaping America. Discover actionable insights to build a motivated workforce.
Welcome to the I Build America podcast. I'm with Wendy Perry, who's with Workforce Blueprint as the managing director and founder. And we're meeting here in the U.S., but you flew in from Australia to join us.
I did, yep.
Welcome.
All the way. Thank you. And all the way from Adelaide in South Australia.
I love Australia. So I'm glad that you're here. But we had a brief conversation just the other day where we discussed workforce in Australia versus the workforce in the United States. Tell us, though, what the organization does.
So the company that I founded is 23 this year, and it provides strategic workforce planning.
23?
Yeah, years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it does.
You've been doing this for a while.
I have.
Okay.
So strategic workforce planning and development services for organisations or industry sectors in cities and towns, regions, and even whole countries.
Oh, wow.
And then we feed a lot of that insight and information back into the education system.
Okay.
About the future of jobs.
So you help countries with their workforce development program. What kind of countries? Which countries are you working with around the globe?
Well, the list is 32, but maybe if I just pick a couple.
32 countries that you're working with? Very impressive. And I ask that because it's, sometimes when you get into your own country, having the ability to look and see what others are doing is just a good barometer to understand what you might do well and maybe not so well. So the fact that you're working with 32 countries is impressive.
Yeah, thank you. And a lot are in the Asia-Pacific region.
Okay.
So more like our nearby neighbours. So
sure.
Indonesia and the Maldives and Sri Lanka and Malaysia and Philippines. And one of my favourites, which is Bhutan, which is at the base of the Himalayas.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Now, I'm amazed by it. Walk me through what an engagement looks like. What do you help them to understand and resolve? And then maybe define what it is that your company provides from a full service suite perspective.
Sure. So I guess it depends upon the specific need. So because we've got a variety of clients and they might be an organization wanting to scope out their future workforce requirements, usually they're feeling some sort of pain, right?
Right.
They're not going to do a strategic workforce plan unless they're feeling enough pain and, stress around things like turnover, problems with retention, development in their pipeline. And that could be for an organization or, like I was saying, industry sector or an occupation. And more we're doing projects where it's specific industry sector in a particular regional location.
Right.
And that regionality really makes it an absolute issue to try and recruit. But we have a specific methodology and it's called Take Action.
Okay.
So it's 10 steps to it. And just quickly, it's the full picture.
Take your time. Go ahead and tell us before 10.
Okay, cool. So it's the full picture where we look at what's, happening in the context of the location and the country and the client and the industry. It's at this time. So it's like, what does the current workforce profile look like? Then the hardest part is the K in the Take Action system, which is know what you want.
Okay.
So this is where we have stakeholders that basically work together to define the workforce profile that they want. Usually, we work on a time frame that suits them. So it could be 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. And we define through scenario planning and strategic foresight what that profile should look like.
Right.
And then the E is evaluate the gaps. And then we have an action plan, which is address the gaps, coaching and mentoring. The T is timelines. The I is inspiration, because sometimes this work can be a little bit dry.
Right.
The O is ongoing review, and the N is next workforce.
Okay.
So that is the structure for the methodology and the actual process.
Sure.
As well as the output, as in the strategic workforce plan.
Okay.
But we see a lot of the time the take is done okay, not the know what you want terribly often. But not the action either. So these things can sometimes, sit on a shelf and never be implemented.
Okay.
Or it's a glossy report with recommendations, but people don't know what to do next.
Sure.
So ours is heavy on the action and the implementation, and that's a key point of difference with the work that we do.
So in the United States, we aren't the only ones struggling with workforce development, it sounds like.
No, we are in a situation in Australia with very low unemployment. In fact, it's too low, and huge labour and skill shortages in just about every industry you can think of.
And it was just, you mentioning Australia, I know that they're big into ship production now, shipbuilding.
Shipbuilding, the defence sector is a key one, particularly from the state that I'm from, and the space industry too.
Okay. And I think a lot of U.S. employees are going to Australia, correct? And the shipbuilding industry.
Well, we do have shipbuilding yards in our state and Western Australia and a number of other locations building submarines. We also have other projects related to tanks and air, planes and fighter jets and things like that. So we're definitely seeing a ramp up in our defence industry needs.
What are some of the different approaches when you look across the 32 countries you work with in the United States? What are some of the differences in how each country approaches workforce development?
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating, and it's almost like if you could cherry pick all of the best bits from all of the countries and put them together, that would be amazing. So in Australia, we recently have launched more of a national skills plan, but it's actually our first.
Okay.
But when you go to other countries like Vietnam or Bhutan, for example, they've actually had plans in place, that get refreshed every 3 to 5 years for decades.
Right.
So sometimes the observation is that when you're a developing nation, you actually have more strategy and more future-focused plans because you're trying to pull up a lot of your measures, from OECD point of view, for example, your skills level, your labour force participation.
Sure.
And maybe in developed countries, we haven't had to do that as much.
Right.
But the key is having a national workforce plan that links to, where you want to take your country more broadly.
Now, that's interesting. You bring up a national workforce plan. I spoke with someone that described the difference between one of the countries she works in the U.S. is that the U.S. is decentralized.
Yeah.
So it's run by the states. And then this other country, it's federalized. So it's a workforce plan at the national level. And it sounds like you've seen kind of that variation as well.
Yeah, and Australia is probably a hybrid in a way.
Okay.
Because we have 8 states and territories, and we share responsibilities for the workforce at 3 levels, actually. The national sets more the policy direction, with the Prime Minister and key departments, particularly around jobs and training development. We then have state and territory governments that reflect those sorts of departments as well.
Sure.
But they'll then say, okay, we want to customise it because of our state or territory needs. Okay. And then we have local government too, where they often are focused more on, residents and ratepayers. But there's always an economic development theme, and workforce just naturally goes hand in hand with that.
Now, what made you start the operation, the business?
So when I started the company, I was 28.
Okay.
So I'm 51 now. And I was a senior policy advisor for government at the time. Okay. But before that, I had worked as an educational leader in our TAFE system, which would be, I think, like community colleges here.
Right.
And with private training organisations, as well as working in industry-led programs, which were about women into tech, for example, and also, industry needs from a workforce point of view. And I had originally also started teaching adults when I was 21.
Okay.
So I have this mix of background of adult education and learning, a bit of HR, project management, industry, and government sort of context. And so the reason I originally started the business is because I had all these people asking, can you please do this work for us or these projects? I'm like, well, I'm a public servant. And I enjoyed that work, but I found that the higher up in the public service you went, the less autonomy and freedom you actually had. And that's important to me as well as variety. So I quit working for government and put the shingle up and started the business and got some amazing clients really quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, to operate that long is a huge indication of your success in delivering results. And so that alone is to be commended. How does someone engage with you? So couple of things. How does someone find you? Not necessarily your website, which you can give, but how does someone usually come about your name as a good source to do business with? Presume a lot of referrals just because of the quality of your work, but how do they find you? And then what does an engagement look like?
Sure. So I think in Australia, there's not even half a degree of separation from people, right? So we have many clients in every state and territory in Australia, and it is through word of mouth and referral. And I guess it's also about understanding that point of difference, that we're going to be heavy on the action and the implementation, like underpinned by evidence. But networking is key.
Okay.
So, speak a lot of conferences, go to a lot of events, produce a lot of online materials and content and blogs. And even when it comes to the international work, I was racking my brain back in 2013, how do I have a bigger impact beyond, an Australian context? And I had a key contact that I knew who was a bit of a friend that was already doing some work in that international capacity and capability development space. So he acted really like an informal mentor in a way.
Okay.
And I said, I really want to do this. We're doing great work here, but I'd love to be able to support individuals and organisations and communities in other countries, to achieve their full potential. So this particular friend opened up a door because he said, I didn't know you wanted to do that, but now I know. So the first 2 projects that my company worked on internationally was in the Maldives and in Bhutan because of this particular guy. And in this international space, once you get known for working with other countries, because in a way you're sort of like a semi-diplomat, perhaps.
You're like an ambassador of sorts, yeah.
I always say I'm unofficial ambassador. Then the clients get more familiar with you. So people can reach out directly for basically a chat and a conversation about their workforce issues and needs. Sometimes we respond to tenders and proposals and are invited to put something forward, often without that much competition because of the approach that we take. And, sometimes it's just randomly bumping into people at events like this conference.
I know you've described your 10 areas, but what makes your approach unique such that you have little companies? Because there's some big consulting companies that are global companies. The PwCs and the Deloittes and plenty of other companies around the globe. But what makes your approach so unique that you can be one of few bidders on a specific contract?
And they are absolutely people that we get compared to, So it is the methodology with the focus on the know what you want and how we flesh out that scenario plan with strategic foresight. So this is a methodology that some people haven't heard of, and it can be applied to anything, but we specifically apply it to workforce.
Okay.
The key with it is that when we look at the full picture and the workforce at this time, we're obviously looking at data and trends and information. And that'll say things are going in a particular direction.
Sure.
Right? And some people will say, well, you can't change that.
Right.
But when you define the preferred workforce picture that you want and you use this strategic foresight methodology, you can change that trajectory by saying, we don't necessarily want that trend or that line on unemployment or language literacy and numeracy or whatever the data might be saying.
Right.
We want something different. And that is the strength there is the skills of facilitation and to actually pull that together with your stakeholders to make that practical and realistic but enticing.
Okay.
And then you design all of your workforce development strategies towards that future picture.
Okay.
So that's a key point of difference. But I think probably the other one is that sometimes people's experience is more narrow, like maybe only one country or a particular industry sector. And because we work across so many different countries, that brings a lot of rich insights when you're designing the workforce development.
And that's partly why I asked earlier, as I mentioned, is having that ability to analyze what's worked in other countries is so critical. When I've run some of the programs at companies and we're looking at scaling the business, it's so useful for me to look at similar companies, both in industry, maybe geography, depending on how broad we are across multiple states, but also the size and scope from a revenue or where we want to go from a revenue perspective. And I presume the countries are much the same. What country is doing what country is similar to us on their trajectory, and how do we take some of those best practices from around the globe to provide a better workforce development program?
Sure. And I guess just on your point, there's 2 other businesses that I run that are more in the entrepreneurial innovation space.
Okay.
So I think sometimes you think like an entrepreneur with this workforce side of things too, and you test things out, right? You're always problem seeking and you're trying to find, a best fit for that. And so that's a different sort of way of thinking. And so if people have run their own business or they've been in that entrepreneurial startup, scale-up space, I think that goes hand in hand actually with workforce planning and development.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the Maldives. I'm not sure if you're still working on a project there, but that was your first project.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Can you tell us about whatever is publicly available, but what the challenge was and what you helped them to resolve?
Yeah. So with Maldives, because it's such an amazing location,
it is.
You can imagine that people from all around the world want to have it on their resume and work there. Right. So what that then means is it can displace local Maldivian workers out of job roles and cause their unemployment to be quite high. And at the time, it was around 40% when we were doing this work, and youth unemployment was even more critical. Maldives has quite a young population, like even the ministers are in their late 20s and early 30s. So we launched a apprenticeship program there to basically support local Maldivians into jobs, particularly in the tourism and the resort sector space.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
40% unemployment?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was at that time. I'm not sure what it is at the moment, but
sure.
They have many challenges as well because it's a huge number of islands.
Right.
And even the capital city, Malé, is only a 1 by 2 kilometre island.
Wow.
So there's, overcrowding, there's limited housing, there's issues around climate change and the, island sinking.
Right.
If people want to work, they often have to travel to another island, but they might have to then also live there. So they might be away from their family. So it's a complex sort of situation. But
fascinating.
It's really important that local people are not displaced.
Sure.
In this workplace context.
And so you're spending time in the United States?
Yes.
Are you expanding your portfolio of business here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I've got a number of different meetings, and I have been traveling to the U.S. for about 10 years, often to go to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, with my other businesses sort of hats on. And what I'm doing here, I guess, is sharing some of the practices in Australia at a session that I'm presenting and how it is similar or different to the US, but also looking at, is there some sort of knowledge or learning that we could share with workforce development practitioners that would help their practice?
So in a lot of your discussions and session, what's the premise? What are you finding as differences between the United States and Australia from a workforce development that you're using to help them understand how to build a successful program here in the U.S.?
There is quite a few differences, actually. So we are all trying to solve very similar problems. I think that's 80 or 90% the same. The way we're doing it is different. So in Australia, we have a national vocational education and training system with training packages and qualifications that are industry designed and led.
Okay.
We have Australian apprenticeships that have been around, literally since World War II, since the 50s and 60s. And we have a competency-based education approach embedded into the way that we do these sorts of things. And there's even simple things like the leave provisions and the pay rates and all these sorts of things. So I'm definitely seeing examples of amazing practice in pockets across the US. And it's similar to in Australia, but it's just that we have some fundamental mechanisms that sort of help us with that national approach. And national
what are some of those then? So a couple things. What are some of those approaches?
Yeah.
What is your youth education system? So in the U.S. K through 12 system, what does that look like? I know it varies by country on how those are structured. And then what does your college system look like as well, just to get people an understanding from a comparison standpoint?
Yeah, I think our K to 12 system is relatively similar.
Okay.
We have national curriculum, and then we have enhancements at a state and territory level, depending upon what the state might be focused on or whatever. So we do have consistency.
And do they have similar career and technical education programs in the high school equivalent?
Yes, for sure. So we have one thing that is a little bit different is we have school-based apprenticeships.
Okay.
So in year 10 to 12, you can basically be employed by an employer and be paid and study on or off the job with a registered training organisation and complete your qualification or significant component of your qualification, and that counts towards your Year 12 graduation.
Okay.
And it also gives you a score that you can use to go to college, or we call it universities or higher education in Australia. So it doesn't stop your pathway one way or the other. You've still got options.
Okay.
Even in a high school context, we do have probably more of a competency-based approach, and we have some schools that specialise in entrepreneurial education and others that specialise as technical or trade schools as well. So everything is customised to suit the trades, like the maths or the English, to suit carpentry or plumbing or electrical. It's themed around those sorts of things. And we have another thing called VET in schools. So you might not be employed at this stage, but you're still doing vocational subjects that count towards your graduation at the end of high school.
So what innovations would you bring to someone in the U.S. looking to engage with you on workforce development?
I think that strategic workforce planning approach is really key.
Fantastic.
Because perhaps what we can get involved in is fixing here and now problems with workforce development programs and solutions and strategies, and that's important. But if you only do here and now, top of mind issues, you never get in front. You're always chasing your tail, and it's actually really transformational when you work with stakeholders around the fact that they can design the future that they actually want to see rather than just one that they get given.
Right.
So I've seen many examples of how that changes complete industry sectors or communities because people have gotten behind that perspective.
What's one of your current or upcoming exciting projects in workforce development that again, whatever you can say without reaching a contract, but what, when I think about the 32 countries that you're working with, it's just, I love learning, and I love learning in a way that helps me figure out how to do what I'm doing even better.
Yeah.
So for someone in the U.S., if they were to look at your 32 countries and an upcoming project, and they can glean from it some uniqueness, which one would you pull out as a discussion topic?
What is it okay if I do one Australian and one international? Is that cool?
Sure.
And actually, many people that I've met are very interested in potentially doing this type of global work as well. Yeah. So I think that's a great opportunity. An Australian one is, at the moment, we're working with the mining and resources sector in a regional Victoria and New South Wales, specifically around gold mining and mineral sands. And these sectors, they have some differences because gold mining is much more established and mature. The mineral sands is kicking off with more brand new sites. But we're getting to the point of this project now, having done the consultation and all of the analysis of the evidence and the groups looking at the draft workforce action plan, which is very detailed. But I think we're going to have to almost double the workforce numbers. And this is in a location where the unemployment rate is 1-2%, almost like down to zero in a way.
Oh, wow.
So there's not going to be just a natural labour pool to pull from.
Sure.
We're going to have to work on any untapped resource that we can, as well as bringing people in, and a pipeline that starts at primary school.
Wow. Are they looking at people out of the region and or out of the country, or just out of the region but still in the country?
All of those things.
Okay.
So generally speaking, it's good practice to try and have what we call a residential workforce in mining and resources. We don't necessarily want to set up like a temporary accommodation and create villages and things like that, because that has its own set of circumstances and problems, potentially. So usually we like to do, I'm not sure what it is in miles, but 100K radius is maybe like, 45-minute drive kind of thing.
Okay.
But that has a problem because it could pull from other towns that are struggling. So there's that residential side. Definitely we're looking at people that might be, we call it FIFO, like flying in and flying out to other interstate locations.
Okay.
And there's a strategy to potentially see if we can pull them back with a bit of a angle-long lifestyle and, being where your family is and not having to travel. But we're also looking at skilled migration strategies too.
What's the work visa process like there? H-1Bs here in the U.S. are similar tools to help people come internationally.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit complex, and We actually we had our federal election on the weekend, and our current Prime Minister, which is Labor, has won again. Both sides of politics want to reduce the number of skilled migrants, which is challenging because we do rely upon skilled migrants for many areas, and there's specific categories. So we have like a skilled occupation list in Australia. So if the occupation is on the list, then it kind of gets a ranking, or it's easier, if you like, to get a skilled visa through that.
Sure.
So it'll be in the mix, but it won't be a panacea solution.
And I ask, not to get into the politics of a country, but that immigration piece is such a critical component from the workforce development side. There's so many groups, even in the U.S., whether they're going into agriculture or software development, they come on a specific visa and they're able to work within that industry and sponsored by the company. Yeah. I've processed so many of those visas just to get into the States to work. Yeah. And I suspect that if a community has a 0% unemployment, then you're going to have to work really hard to find the talent.
Yeah, and we need to sort of advocate and push that up to the state and the federal politicians as well. We do have different visa categories. We have international students, we have entrepreneur visas and things like that. But you usually need to work through a specialist agent to go through that process.
Fascinating.
And it does take some time. So this is why instead of each individual employer working on that as a collective, that's one of the things that we're suggesting we can do together.
And then there was a second one you mentioned.
The second one is my favorite country, Bhutan, and this is bordered by India and Nepal and China.
Okay.
And last year I went to the Bhutan Innovation Forum with the King and the Prime Minister.
Very nice.
And the reason this is a favourite is because it's the second country that we did international work with them for 12 years now. And at the Innovation Forum, the announcement and the detail came about the first net zero mindfulness city in the whole world.
Okay.
So this country is the only net zero country on the planet.
Oh, my.
And it's setting up a special economic zone in Galafu Mindfulness City. And we're working with the government there on their workforce and training needs, but also in other sectors like energy sector, for example.
Okay.
And tourism and the entrepreneurial ecosystem as well. So that's an exciting one that's, we're seeing these things roll out. They need completely new legislation and rules and regulation about this special zone.
Sure.
But it is attracting attention globally because
amazing.
Where else could you do a city, from this?
Right.
Well, there's already a town there, but it's almost like from scratch. And with that goal of making it the first net zero mindfulness city, because Bhutanese have a particular cultural context around measuring gross national happiness.
Okay. Can you tell us more about that element?
About the G&H?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's 9 different elements, and I guess I only understand it from a Westerner's point of view, and it's more probably spiritual than that, but it basically means that we don't just measure economic development and growth. We measure things like how we spend our time and our family connections and relationships, and we value the environment. So all of these components come together.
Okay.
And it's something that the former king set in place when he came to the throne when he was only 17.
Oh, gosh.
And this is in the 1970s, and the country has an annual measure on G&H.
Okay.
And it's woven through all of their government strategies and policies, but on a practical level, it's a way of life.
Okay.
As well.
How does that influence a typical work week? There's so many countries that they do not have the normal 5-day work week, 8 to 5 kind of structure. So I don't know if there's a uniqueness there.
Bhutan still has, depends if you work for government or non-government. So they still have a relatively structured work week and even like lunchtime breaks and things like that. Right. And people do wear traditional clothing and dress.
Okay.
Often during the week, depends what job role you've got. There's a few different religions there, but it's predominantly Buddhist as well. So if you can just imagine the sweetest, kindest, loveliest people who really care deeply about their country. They're very loyal to the royal family and their government. yeah, they're just adorable. They're a pleasure to work with.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's next for your business? You've been in business now for
Yeah.
quite a number of years, and it sounds like you have multiple businesses.
Yeah.
But on the workforce development side, what's next as you continue to expand internationally and expand in the United States?
For sure. So we have a number of associates and contractors, and we have a program which is called the Global Workforce Architects Program.
Okay.
So this one now is going to be re-energized, and we're looking for more potential partners in more countries around the world to scale it up kind of like even further.
Very nice.
And I guess because we're seeing a lot of common issues, even in places that have traditionally had high unemployment, we're still seeing significant demand and supply mismatch, and particularly around the education and skills side. So there's a lot of opportunity and work to be done, and we're looking for people that might want to either be individuals that perhaps want to take on that kind of role in their location, or have more of a global approach to their work, or organisations that want to sort of partner with us, because we're using AI in every step of our process now, and we want to sort of take that to the next level with a number of different tools.
Love it.
Yeah.
Wendy, it's been an absolutely pleasure having you on the Build America podcast and getting the international understanding of workforce development. It's been quite a joy. Yeah. So again, how does someone reach you?
So you can go to the workforceblueprint.com.au website. You can find Wendy Perry on LinkedIn, follow or connect there. That's one of the number one platforms that I'm using in terms of social media, or email Wendy at workforceblueprint.com.au.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks again for joining us.
No problems.
And congratulations on your expansion and your continued work in this industry. Thanks for joining us on the I Build America podcast, where even with Wendy now, we're exploring workforce development internationally, trying to bring to our listeners solutions and ideas for how they can continue to make improvements in the workforce industry. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the I Build America podcast. Please subscribe, share, and comment, and be sure to join us next time for more insights and inspiring conversations on building a powerful American workforce. I Build America, building workforce success one podcast at a time.